My girlfriend gave me an ultimatum to quit my pastry chef career for a manly job and called me embarrassing for making cakes. But she found out how much I actually make. My girlfriend Lisa and I had been together for 3 years when she started complaining about my career as a pastry chef. At first, she'd loved it, bragging to friends about dating someone who could make croissants from scratch and create wedding cakes that cost thousands. She'd post photos of everything I made, calling herself the luckiest girl alive. But then her friend Amber started dating an investment banker, and suddenly Lisa's attitude changed completely. She'd come home from girls' nights and ask why I couldn't get a real job like Amber's boyfriend. I asked what was fake about running the pastry department at one of the city's best restaurants. She said making cupcakes wasn't a career, it was a hobby that somehow paid money. She actually said grown men shouldn't be decorating cakes for a living. She started refusing to tell people what I did, saying I worked in the food industry, and changing the subject. When her coworkers asked for specifics, she'd say I was in restaurant management. At her company holiday party, her boss asked about my work, and before I could answer, Lisa said I was considering transitioning to something more substantial. I asked what that meant, and she said something about leadership and authority, not playing with frosting all day. Her boss, who'd been excited to meet me after eating my desserts at a charity event, looked confused. Lisa spent the whole ride home listing careers she thought were more respectable. Finance, law, engineering, even sales would be better than what she called my fancy housewife job. She said real men built things, sold things, or managed money. They didn't spend hours making sure macarons had the perfect feet or tempering chocolate to exactly the right temperature. She said she was embarrassed to tell people her boyfriend was basically a baker with a fancy title. I reminded her that I made $90,000 a year, had won 3 national competitions, and was about to open my own bakery. She said none of that mattered if people thought I was feminine for doing it. She actually used the word feminine like it was poison. She bought me books about switching careers, signed me up for coding bootcamp information sessions, and forwarded me job listings for anything she deemed masculine enough. When I didn't apply, she'd say I was choosing my silly job over our relationship. She'd ask if I wanted to be single forever because no woman wanted a man who spent his days piping buttercream roses. The breaking point was when she gave me an ultimatum at our anniversary dinner. She said I had 6 months to find a manly job or she was done. She'd already told her friends I was planning to leave baking, and she'd look stupid if I didn't follow through. She said she wanted a boyfriend she could be proud of, not someone who made birthday cakes for children. She actually printed out statistics about average salaries in finance and said I was wasting my potential making pastries. I agreed to her timeline, but not in the way she expected. I spent those 6 months working on something special. See, I'd been planning to propose before Lisa started her campaign against my career. I'd even designed a custom cake for the proposal, 5 tiers with sugar flowers that took weeks to perfect. Instead, I used those 6 months to open my bakery earlier than planned. I worked 18-hour days, called in every favor, and pushed through permits in record time. Lisa thought I was networking for a new career. I was actually building my dream business. The bakery opened exactly 6 months after her ultimatum. I didn't tell Lisa, just said I had a surprise about my career change. She got dressed up, thinking I was taking her to celebrate my new corporate job. She'd already told everyone I'd finally manned up and gotten real employment. She'd posted about being proud of my growth and maturity, how I'd chosen our future over silly dreams. I drove her to the bakery's grand opening instead. The place was packed with food critics, local celebrities, and investors I'd been working with. The mayor was there to cut the ribbon. Local news was covering it as the most anticipated opening of the year. Lisa stood frozen as people congratulated me on following my passion and building something amazing. Her coworkers were there because I'd invited the whole company. Her boss asked why Lisa had said I was leaving baking when I'd clearly just invested everything in it. Her friends saw the 5-tier proposal cake in the window with a sign saying, "Reserved for someone who deserves it," and asked if it was for Lisa. My answer made everyone freeze. I told them the cake was for Lisa, back when she wanted a boyfriend who made art with sugar instead of one who pushed papers in an office. The bakery went dead silent. Every conversation stopped mid-sentence. Lisa's face went white like someone had drained all the blood out of it. Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. I watched her friends look at each other with these confused expressions, trying to figure out what just happened. Her coworker Sarah actually took a step back. The proposal cake sat in the window behind me, 5 perfect tiers with sugar flowers I'd spent 3 weeks making, and everyone could see it now for what it was. A monument to what could have been if Lisa hadn't decided my career was embarrassing. Brock Wheeler turned to Lisa with his eyebrows all scrunched together. He asked why she'd told everyone at the office I was leaving the restaurant business when I'd clearly just opened my own place. Lisa's voice came out shaky when she tried to answer. She said something about misunderstanding my plans, about how things got confused, but her hands were shaking, and she kept looking at the floor. 3 of her coworkers were standing right there, and I saw them exchange these looks. The kind of looks people give when they're realizing someone's been lying to them. One woman actually crossed her arms and stepped away from Lisa. Another one whispered something to the person next to her. Lisa's whole story was falling apart in front of everyone she worked with. Lisa grabbed my arm hard enough that her nails dug into my skin. She pulled me toward the corner, her voice desperate and too loud. She kept saying we needed to talk privately, that this was all a huge misunderstanding. I pulled my hand away gently but firmly. I told her there wasn't anything to misunderstand. She'd given me 6 months to pick between my career and our relationship. I picked my career. Her eyes got really wide and wet. She opened her mouth to argue, but I was already turning away. People were staring at us now. The whole grand opening had turned into a spectacle, and not the good kind I'd planned. Zoe Peacock appeared next to me with her camera guy right behind her. She had that look reporters get when they smell a story that's bigger than what they came for. She asked if I wanted to comment on what was happening with my personal life. I shook my head and smiled in that polite way you do when you want someone to go away. I redirected her to the bakery instead. Told her about the menu we'd developed, the team I'd hired, the local suppliers we were using. My voice stayed calm and professional, even though my heart was beating, so hard I could feel it in my throat. The camera was still rolling. Lisa was crying in the corner. And I was talking about butter percentages and croissant dough like everything was normal. Natalie grabbed my elbow and pulled me through the kitchen doors. The noise from the main room got muffled as the door swung shut. She looked at me with real concern in her eyes and asked if I was okay. Her voice was soft. She'd watched me work 18-hour days for 6 months, knew I'd been keeping this whole thing secret from Lisa. I leaned against the stainless steel counter and admitted I felt vindicated, but also kind of empty. I'd been building toward this moment for half a year, imagining Lisa's face when she realized what I'd done. Now that it was happening, it felt hollow somehow, like winning a fight that didn't need to happen in the first place. Natalie squeezed my shoulder but didn't say anything. Sometimes there's nothing to say. Back in the main room, I could hear raised voices. I pushed through the kitchen doors to find Alicia Solis standing in front of Lisa near the dessert display. Alicia's voice carried across the whole bakery. She was asking Lisa why she'd lied to everyone for months. Other guests had stopped pretending not to listen. They were just openly watching now. Lisa's mascara was running down her cheeks in black streaks. She insisted she hadn't lied, that I'd agreed to look for other work. But Alicia cut her off. She pointed out there's a difference between discussing options and telling everyone your boyfriend is leaving his career. Lisa's other friends had gathered around and none of them looked supportive. They looked angry and embarrassed. Mateo Santos was standing on a chair near the front window when I came back out. He had a champagne glass in his hand, and people were turning to listen to him. He started talking about the bakery's potential, about how rare it was to find someone with both technical skill and artistic vision. He said something about integrity and following your passion even when people doubt you. His words felt pointed, like he was making a statement about what just happened with Lisa. I felt grateful for his support. Then I noticed Lisa standing in the doorway, tears still streaming down her face, watching Mateo praise everything she'd told me to give up. She looked broken in a way that made my chest hurt despite everything. Raymond Hickman, the mayor, cut the ribbon with these huge ceremonial scissors. Cameras flashed. People clapped. I stood next to him and smiled for the photos, trying to focus on this professional achievement instead of my relationship exploding 10 feet away. The doors opened, and customers started flooding in. They crowded around the display cases, pointing at the pastries and asking questions. A woman took a bite of a raspberry macaron, and her eyes went wide. She told her friend it was the best thing she'd ever tasted. Another customer was taking photos of the chocolate eclairs. Their excitement reminded me why I'd fought so hard for this. This was what mattered. Not Lisa's opinions about masculine careers, not her friend's judgment, just the work itself and people appreciating it. Lisa appeared next to me during a brief, quiet moment. Her makeup was completely ruined. Her voice cracked when she asked if we could please go somewhere private to talk. She said we needed to work this out. I looked at her and felt tired more than angry. I told her we could talk tomorrow when we'd both calmed down. But tonight was about the bakery, about the team who'd helped build this place. It wasn't about us or what we'd lost. She started to argue, but I was already walking away. I had customers to greet, critics to talk to, a business to run. Our relationship was over, and I needed to focus on what came next. Haley Tran found me near the kitchen entrance. She's the most important food critic in the city, and her reviews can make or break a restaurant. She told me the pastries were exceptional, said she was impressed by the technical skill and artistic vision on display. Her professional validation hit me harder than I expected. My personal life was falling apart, but the work was good. Really good. I thanked her and tried to keep my voice steady. She smiled and said she'd be writing a feature about the opening. Then she walked away to sample more desserts, and I stood there feeling like maybe I'd made the right choice after all. Lisa pushed through the crowd toward the exit with Alicia following close behind, her hand pressed against her mouth like she was trying to hold back more than just sobs. I watched them disappear into the street and felt something twist inside my chest that wasn't quite the victory I'd been imagining for 6 months. 3 years of memories didn't just vanish because the last 6 months were terrible. I remembered the Lisa who used to wait up for me after late shifts, who'd taste test experimental flavors and give honest feedback, who genuinely seemed proud of what I created before Amber and Nathan changed everything. Seeing her shoulders shake like that, knowing I'd orchestrated this public breakdown, made me feel sick even though I knew she'd earned every bit of this humiliation. The satisfaction I'd expected felt hollow and complicated, like winning a game nobody should have been playing in the first place. A customer approached asking about the raspberry tarts in the display case, and I forced myself back into professional mode. The bakery was still packed with people who wanted to celebrate this opening, and I couldn't let my messy personal life ruin what should have been a perfect night. More food critics circulated through the space, taking notes and sampling different pastries. 2 investors I'd been courting for months cornered me near the kitchen to discuss expansion possibilities, talking about opening a second location within the year if the first 6 months went well. Mateo joined the conversation and mentioned he'd already identified 3 potential properties in neighboring districts that would be perfect for satellite shops. The business talk grounded me, reminded me this was about more than revenge against Lisa. Natalie appeared at my elbow with a tray of fresh cream puffs, her movements efficient and confident as she navigated the crowd. She'd been working 18-hour days alongside me for the past 3 months, perfecting recipes and training the rest of the kitchen staff. Watching her handle the dinner rush without breaking a sweat made me realize how much this success belonged to the whole team, not just my wounded pride and need to prove Lisa wrong. These people believed in the vision when it was just sketches and business plans. They'd earned this triumph as much as I had. The evening stretched on with more customers flowing through the doors, more compliments on the pastries, more professional connections being made. A woman from the Culinary Institute asked if I'd consider teaching a masterclass on sugar work next semester. A magazine editor wanted to feature the bakery in their summer issue. 2 separate wedding planners requested consultations for custom cakes. The professional validation felt real and earned in a way that had nothing to do with Lisa or her opinions about masculine careers. I moved through conversations on autopilot, part of my brain still processing the image of Lisa's destroyed face as she'd fled into the night. The other part was fully present, grateful for every person who'd shown up to support this dream I'd fought so hard to build. The staff started closing procedures around 11, and I helped break down the display cases and wipe down counters alongside everyone else. Max opened champagne bottles he'd stashed in the walk-in cooler, and we gathered in the kitchen for an impromptu celebration. The pastry chefs and front-of-house staff were laughing and recounting moments from the evening, their joy uncomplicated by the emotional baggage weighing me down. Max raised his glass and gave a toast about following your passion even when people doubt you, about having the courage to build something meaningful instead of taking the safe path. His words felt pointed, like he was making a statement about what had happened with Lisa earlier. I wondered how much of the drama everyone had witnessed, whether they'd all seen her breakdown or just heard about it secondhand. Natalie caught my eye across the kitchen and gave me a small smile that felt understanding rather than pitying. She'd listened to me vent about Lisa's ultimatum enough times to know exactly what tonight represented beyond the professional achievement. I drove home alone to my new apartment, the one I'd rented 3 months ago when sharing space with Lisa became impossible. She'd been so convinced I was job hunting that she never questioned why I was suddenly working late every night or why I needed my own place to focus on career transition planning. The lies had been easy because she'd wanted so badly to believe I was finally becoming the person she thought I should be. My car sat in the parking garage with the engine off for 20 minutes while I tried to process everything that had just happened. The grand opening had been perfect from a business perspective, everything I'd hoped for professionally. But the personal cost felt heavier than I'd expected, watching someone I'd loved for 3 years completely fall apart in public. I'd wanted her to see what she'd almost made me give up, wanted her to feel embarrassed about her campaign against my career. Mission accomplished, I guess. But sitting alone in the dark, I couldn't shake the image of her face when she realized I'd been planning this the whole time she thought I was becoming someone different. My phone started buzzing before I'd even made it upstairs to the apartment. Lisa's name lit up the screen over and over, texts coming in rapid succession. The first few were angry, accusing me of deliberately humiliating her in front of everyone she knew. Then they shifted to desperate pleas asking why I'd done this, how I could be so cruel. Didn't our 3 years together mean anything? She wanted to know when I'd started planning the bakery, whether I'd been lying to her the whole 6 months, if I'd ever actually considered changing careers, or if it had all been an elaborate setup for revenge. More texts flooded in asking me to call her, to at least give her a chance to explain her side, to understand that she'd only wanted what was best for both of us. I read them all without responding, needing space to sort through my own feelings before I could handle hers. Around 2 in the morning, I finally silenced my phone after the 17th text and managed to fall asleep on the couch still wearing my dress shirt from the opening. Morning light woke me up around 7, and I immediately checked my phone out of habit. 17 messages from Lisa overnight, but also several emails from food critics who'd attended the opening. Haley Tran's review was already published online, and I read it 3 times to make sure I wasn't imagining the glowing praise. She called the bakery a game changer for the city's dessert scene, praised the technical skill and artistic vision on display, and specifically mentioned the salted caramel eclairs as the best she'd tasted in a decade. The professional success felt real and earned, completely separate from the revenge element that had motivated my timeline. I'd opened the bakery 6 months early just to prove Lisa wrong, but the work itself was good enough to stand on its own merit. Reading Haley's review, I started to feel genuinely proud rather than just vindicated. This wasn't just about showing Lisa she'd been wrong. It was about building something meaningful that would outlast our failed relationship. 3 days later, I met Lisa for coffee at a neutral cafe neither of us had been to before. She looked exhausted and defeated in a way I'd never seen. Her eyes red and puffy like she'd been crying for 72 hours straight. She'd texted asking if we could talk in person, promising she wouldn't make a scene or try to change my mind about anything. I agreed because we needed some kind of closure, even if that closure was just confirming the relationship was definitely over. She apologized immediately, words tumbling out about how she'd pressured me to change careers and how wrong that had been. She admitted she'd let her insecurity about Amber's relationship poison what we had, that seeing Amber with Nathan had made her question whether she'd chosen the right partner. Her apology felt more about her guilt than genuine understanding of what she'd done, more about making herself feel better than acknowledging the real damage she'd caused. She asked if there was any chance we could work through this, her voice breaking as she promised she'd never question my career again. I looked at her across the table and felt tired more than angry. I told her the problem wasn't just about my job, though that was part of it. The real issue was her willingness to prioritize others' opinions over my happiness and our relationship, to care more about what her friends thought than about who I actually was. That broke something fundamental between us that I didn't think could be repaired, not with promises or apologies or time. She'd spent 6 months systematically trying to change me into someone different, someone more acceptable to her social circle. That kind of sustained campaign wasn't a mistake or a momentary lapse in judgment. It was a pattern that showed me who she became when she felt socially inadequate. Lisa started crying harder, saying she knew she'd messed up but insisting that people make mistakes and deserve second chances. I agreed that people deserve chances, but 6 months of sustained pressure and public humiliation wasn't a mistake. It was a deliberate pattern of behavior that revealed something about her character I couldn't ignore. She'd lied to her friends, her co-workers, her boss about my plans because she was ashamed of what I actually did for a living. She'd called my career feminine like it was an insult, dismissed my national competition wins as meaningless, and given me an ultimatum that forced me to choose between my identity and our relationship. Those weren't mistakes. They were choices she'd made repeatedly over half a year, and they showed me exactly who she becomes when she feels socially inadequate compared to her friends. We ended the conversation with painful finality, both of us knowing there was no path forward together. Lisa asked if she could at least tell people we ended things mutually, rather than admitting she'd driven me away with her campaign against my career. I told her she could say whatever she needed to say to protect her image. I was done managing her reputation, or protecting her from the consequences of her choices. She'd spent 6 months caring more about what other people thought than about our relationship. Now she could deal with whatever those people thought about why we'd broken up. I left the coffee shop feeling lighter somehow, like I'd finally set down a weight I'd been carrying since the anniversary dinner ultimatum. The bakery success felt more purely mine now, motivated by genuine passion rather than spite. Lisa's opinion didn't matter anymore, and that freedom felt better than any revenge could have. The first week turned into something I hadn't quite prepared for, even after all the planning and secret work. Lines formed outside the bakery before we opened each morning, wrapping around the corner by the time I unlocked the doors at 7. We sold out of croissants by 9, macarons by 10, and most specialty cakes by early afternoon. Natalie and I worked 16-hour days trying to keep up with demand, baking in shifts and training new staff as fast as we could hire them. The exhaustion felt different from the 6 months of secret preparation, less desperate and more exhilarating, like we were riding a wave that kept building instead of worrying it would crash. Mateo called on Thursday afternoon while I was elbow-deep in brioche dough, his voice excited in a way I'd never heard from him before. He wanted to discuss moving up the expansion timeline, opening a second location within 6 months instead of the planned 2 years. The numbers from our first week had exceeded even his most positive projections, and he had 3 other investors ready to commit additional funding if we could maintain this momentum. I told him I'd think about it, but my mind was already racing through the logistics and possibilities. Hanging up, I realized the bakery had become its own story, something separate from the revenge that had motivated its rushed opening. People weren't lining up because they'd heard about my dramatic breakup with Lisa. They were coming back day after day because the pastries were exceptional, because word was spreading about the quality and creativity, because we'd built something genuinely worth the hype. That shift in perspective felt important somehow, like I was finally seeing past the anger that had fueled me for 6 months. Natalie mentioned the apprenticeship requests on Friday while we were prepping for the weekend rush. And 3 culinary school students had reached out through our website, all of them male, all of them specifically citing the opening coverage and my willingness to pursue pastry arts despite the gender stereotypes Lisa had thrown at me. One kid wrote that his girlfriend had been pressuring him to switch to savory cooking because she thought pastry was too feminine, and seeing my success had given him courage to stand his ground. Reading his message made something tight in my chest loosen slightly, like my personal mess had accidentally created something meaningful for other people facing similar pressure. I hadn't thought about my career choice as political or pioneering, just as doing what I loved despite Lisa's campaign against it. But apparently other men noticed when someone refused to let outdated gender expectations dictate their professional path. Natalie said we should seriously consider taking on apprentices once we got through the initial chaos, that building a team of skilled pastry chefs would matter for the long-term success of the business. I agreed, adding it to the growing list of decisions I needed to make about expansion and growth. The idea that my success might encourage other men to follow creative culinary paths added unexpected weight to everything I'd built, a responsibility I hadn't anticipated when I was just trying to prove Lisa wrong. I ran into Amber and Nathan at a restaurant 2 weeks after the opening, an upscale Italian place where I'd gone to study their dessert menu and decompress after another sold-out day. They were finishing dinner at a corner table, and Amber's face went pale when she spotted me walking past. I nodded politely and kept moving toward my table, not interested in awkward conversation, but she caught up to me near the bar. She apologized for causing problems between Lisa and me, her words tumbling out fast like she'd been rehearsing them. I told her she hadn't caused anything, that Lisa's reaction to their relationship had revealed problems that would have surfaced eventually over something else. If it hadn't been Nathan's investment banking career, it would have been another friend's boyfriend with a job Lisa deemed more respectable, or her coworkers' questions about why I wasn't climbing some corporate ladder. The insecurity and need for external validation had been Lisa's issue, not anything Amber had done by simply dating someone she liked. Amber looked relieved, then asked how the bakery was doing, and her interest seemed genuine rather than polite. We talked for a few minutes about the unexpected success and the expansion plans Mateo was pushing, and she mentioned that Nathan had been impressed by the business model and execution speed. They wished me well and returned to their table, and I felt oddly grateful for the encounter. It would have been easy to resent Amber for being the catalyst that changed Lisa's attitude, but that wasn't fair or accurate. She'd just been living her life while Lisa had made choices about how to respond to feeling inadequate in comparison. Lisa's social media went quiet for 2 weeks after the grand opening disaster, her account suddenly private, and her posts invisible to anyone she hadn't specifically approved. Then she posted a vague message about learning hard lessons about authenticity and supporting partners, the kind of carefully worded statement that sounded thoughtful without admitting any specific wrongdoing. Several friends commented with support and encouragement, clearly unaware of the full story behind the cryptic message. I saw the post because Natalie showed it to me, her phone screen displaying Lisa's words while we were taking a rare break between the lunch and dinner rushes. My first instinct was to comment with the actual facts, to correct the narrative Lisa was trying to construct where she'd learned and grown, rather than systematically tried to destroy my career for 6 months. But engaging would only drag out the drama and give Lisa more ammunition to paint herself as the victim of my cruelty. She could tell whatever story she needed to tell to salvage her reputation and self-image. I was done managing how she presented our relationship or protecting her from the natural consequences of her sustained campaign against my identity. The urge to set the record straight faded as I handed Natalie's phone back and returned to tempering chocolate for the evening's dessert service, focusing on the work that mattered instead of the ex who didn't. Max helped me work through investor contracts for the potential second location 3 weeks after opening, his office downtown a welcome escape from the constant activity of the bakery. We spent 2 hours reviewing terms and discussing timeline implications, his legal expertise helping me understand exactly what I'd be committing to if we moved forward with Mateo's accelerated expansion plan. During a break while his assistant printed revised documents, Max asked how I was doing emotionally with everything that had happened. The question caught me off guard after 2 hours of focusing purely on business logistics. I admitted the victory felt more hollow than expected, that proving Lisa wrong didn't erase the pain of losing 3 years with someone I'd loved, even if leaving was the right choice. The bakery's success was real and meaningful, but it didn't fix the fact that I'd invested years in a relationship with someone who ultimately cared more about appearances than about who I actually was. Max nodded like he understood, then said something about how the best revenge is living well, but that doesn't mean the revenge itself brings happiness. He'd gone through a divorce 5 years ago, where his ex-wife had criticized his career choices, and he remembered how hollow the vindication felt when his firm finally made partner. The success mattered, but it didn't heal the wound of having someone you loved reject fundamental parts of your identity. We sat quietly for a moment before his assistant returned with the contracts, and I appreciated that Max had created space for honesty about the complicated emotions underneath the professional triumph. The proposal cake sat in my freezer at home, too beautiful to throw away, but too painful to look at regularly. I'd moved it from the bakery after the grand opening, not wanting the constant reminder of what I'd planned before Lisa's campaign destroyed our relationship. Every few days, I'd open the freezer for ingredients and see it there, the 5 tiers wrapped carefully in plastic, the sugar flowers I'd spent weeks creating still perfect and delicate. I considered donating it to a charity event, letting it serve some purpose instead of just taking up space and emotional energy. But ultimately, I decided to let it go completely, to stop carrying this physical reminder of the future I'd imagined before everything fell apart. I spent a Saturday morning photographing it for my portfolio, documenting the technical work and artistic vision before carefully dismantling the sugar flowers I'd crafted with such hope and excitement months ago. Each petal and leaf went into the trash, and I felt lighter as the tears disappeared piece by piece. The cake had served its purpose at the grand opening, making the point about Lisa's rejection more clearly than any words could have. Now it was time to stop preserving it like a memorial to what might have been. Brock came into the bakery one morning about a month after the opening, his presence unexpected during the usual pre-work rush. He waited until I had a free moment, then pulled me aside to apologize for not questioning Lisa's narrative about my career change sooner. He'd taken her claims at face value because he had no reason to doubt her, but looking back there had been inconsistencies in her story that he should have noticed. Several co-workers had expressed concern about Lisa's judgment and honesty after the grand opening revealed her months of lies, and Brock wanted me to know that her professional reputation was suffering, even though he understood she'd brought it on herself. I felt bad hearing that, despite everything she'd put me through. Lisa had worked hard to build her career, and watching it damaged by her personal choices about our relationship seemed like another layer of loss in an already painful situation. I told Brock I appreciated him coming by, but that I didn't want Lisa's career destroyed over our failed relationship, that the public humiliation at the opening had been enough consequence. He nodded and said he wasn't trying to pile on, just wanted me to understand that people had noticed her dishonesty and were reassessing their trust in her judgment. We left it there, and he bought a dozen croissants before heading to his office. The interaction strange, but somehow necessary for both of us. I focused on developing new menu items and training staff, channeling the complicated emotions about Lisa and the breakup into creative work. Natalie noticed I was working the same exhausting hours I'd maintained during the secret planning phase, arriving before dawn and staying past closing most nights. She gently suggested I needed to find balance now that I wasn't running on revenge-fueled adrenaline, that the bakery's success was established enough that I could step back slightly without everything falling apart. Her concern was valid, but hard to accept when throwing myself into work felt like the only way to avoid processing the emotional mess underneath the professional triumph. I promised to think about it, to consider hiring another senior pastry chef who could share the workload and give me actual days off. The truth was, I didn't know what to do with myself outside the bakery, didn't have hobbies or friends I'd maintained during the months of obsessive planning and execution. My entire life had become about proving Lisa wrong and building this business, and now that both goals were achieved, I felt strangely lost about what came next. 3 weeks after the opening, I attended an industry event, a networking mixer for local restaurant owners and chefs that I'd normally have skipped as tedious obligation. But Mateo insisted it would be good for business connections, and I forced myself to go despite preferring to be in the kitchen. Something shifted during the conversations, though, a realization that I was genuinely enjoying discussions about technique and trends rather than mentally preparing for confrontation or defending my career choices. I talked with other chefs about lamination methods and flavor combinations, debated the merits of different chocolate suppliers, and shared ideas about seasonal menu development without any of the defensiveness that had colored my professional interactions for months. The shift from defensive to confident felt significant, like I was finally living my success rather than wielding it as a weapon against Lisa's criticism. One chef mentioned he'd been following the bakery's opening coverage and asked what inspired the timing, and I gave him the honest answer about personal circumstances creating urgency without going into the full drama. He nodded knowingly and said sometimes the best things come from difficult situations, pushing us to take risks we'd otherwise avoid. Walking to my car after the event, I felt more like myself than I had since before Lisa's attitude changed, more connected to the passion that had drawn me to pastry arts in the first place rather than just the anger that had fueled the bakery's creation. Lisa reached out one more time 4 weeks after the opening, a text message asking if we could have a closure dinner to properly end things. I stared at my phone for several minutes, debating whether more conversation would help or just reopen wounds that were starting to heal. Curiosity won out, a need to know if enough time had passed for real honesty without the immediate rawness of the grand opening confrontation. I agreed, and we met at a neutral restaurant neither of us had painful memories attached to, a quiet bistro across town that served decent food without being anywhere we'd celebrated anniversaries or fought about my career. Lisa looked different somehow, tired but more settled than the devastated person who'd left the bakery opening in tears. We ordered food neither of us really wanted, and started the difficult work of trying to end 3 years together with something resembling grace and mutual understanding. Lisa picked at her salad while I moved food around my plate, neither of us actually eating much of anything. The restaurant felt too quiet despite other diners' conversations around us, like we existed in our own bubble of uncomfortable silence. She finally looked up, and her eyes were red from crying earlier, and she started talking about how everything got twisted after Amber started dating Nathan. She admitted she felt small and unimportant when Amber would talk about fancy dinners and business trips and expensive gifts, and she started measuring our relationship against theirs without even realizing it. She said watching Amber's life made her question everything about her own choices, including me, and she knew that was wrong but couldn't stop comparing. I told her I understood feeling inadequate sometimes, but pointed out that her solution was trying to change who I fundamentally was instead of dealing with her own feelings. She nodded and said she knew that now, that therapy was already helping her see how she projected her insecurities onto my career instead of addressing them directly. I admitted that my secret planning wasn't just about protecting my dream, but also about hurting her back for all the months she hurt me, and that wasn't entirely fair either. The revenge element felt good in the moment, but left me feeling hollow afterward, like I'd won a battle but lost something important in the process. We sat there acknowledging how we both messed up in different ways, how the relationship failed because of choices we both made, rather than one person being completely at fault. The conversation shifted to better times, and Lisa smiled slightly while mentioning our second date when I made her chocolate croissants at 3 in the morning because she mentioned craving them. I remembered how excited she used to get watching me work, asking questions about techniques and tasting everything I made. She talked about the weekend we spent in that cabin upstate, where I taught her how to make proper macarons, and we ate half the batch before they even cooled. Those memories felt distant now, like they belonged to different people, but they were real and good while they lasted. Lisa wasn't always the person who demanded I change careers and made me feel ashamed of my work. She got lost somewhere along the way in comparison and social pressure, and forgot what actually mattered to her. That didn't excuse 6 months of constant criticism and ultimatums, but it made her more complicated than the villain I needed her to be to justify my anger. I could see the person I fell for underneath the insecurity that consumed her and that made everything sadder because it proved we really did lose something valuable, rather than just ending something that was always wrong. We agreed that going our separate ways was the right choice for both of us, that too much damage had been done to rebuild trust and respect. Lisa said she was starting therapy twice a week to work on her self-worth issues and her need for external validation. She wanted to figure out why she let other people's opinions matter more than her own happiness or her partner's feelings. I told her I genuinely hoped therapy helped and that she found peace with herself instead of constantly measuring her value through other people's achievements or relationships. She asked if we could maybe be friends someday after enough time passed and enough healing happened. I said maybe, but I wasn't sure. That right now I needed space to process everything and build my life without the weight of our failed relationship. We split the check even though neither of us ate much, and Lisa hugged me in the parking lot while crying again. She whispered that she was sorry for everything, and that she hoped I found someone who appreciated my talent instead of being embarrassed by it. I hugged her back and felt the finality of it, 3 years ending in a restaurant parking lot with both of us crying and acknowledging our mistakes. Driving home felt different from I expected. Lighter somehow, like I'd been carrying a heavy backpack for months and finally set it down. The anger that fueled me through 6 months of secret planning and the dramatic grand opening had burned itself out during our closure dinner. What remained was just sadness about what we lost, and acceptance that it needed to end. The bakery success felt more purely mine now, without being tangled up in revenge and proving Lisa wrong. I could think about the business as something I built, because I loved it, rather than something I built to hurt someone who hurt me. The shift was subtle but important, changing my motivation from spite to genuine passion. I felt excited about the future in a way I hadn't since before Lisa's attitude changed, excited about creating beautiful pastries and building something meaningful rather than just proving a point. The weight of the anniversary ultimatum lifted completely, replaced by actual enthusiasm for what came next, instead of defensive determination to succeed out of anger. Mateo called 2 days later, asking me to meet him at a property across town, and I drove over curious about what he wanted to show me. The space was smaller than the original bakery, but had huge windows and exposed brick walls that would photograph beautifully. He explained that the landlord was offering a great deal for a 2-year lease, and the neighborhood was rapidly developing with young professionals moving in. We walked through the empty space while Mateo pointed out where equipment could go and how the layout could work for a cafe-style operation. I felt my heart racing looking at the potential, imagining a second location that could reach new customers and employ more staff. Mateo pulled out papers from his briefcase and explained that he and the other investors wanted to move forward with expansion faster than originally planned. The first location's success exceeded all projections, and they believed the concept could support multiple sites. I stared at the contracts, feeling thrilled and terrified in equal measure, realizing this was real growth that would change everything about how I operated. We sat at a makeshift table made of sawhorses and plywood, and I signed the papers while Mateo grinned and shook my hand. He said he believed in my vision and my ability to execute it, that the first bakery proved I could deliver on promises. Walking out of that empty space that would soon become my second location felt surreal, like I was building something bigger than I ever imagined possible. The expansion meant I needed more staff immediately, and I spent 2 weeks interviewing pastry chefs to handle increased demand at both locations. I hired 2 talented professionals who shared my commitment to quality and attention to detail. One had trained in Paris and specialized in French pastries, and the other came from a high-end hotel background with experience managing large-volume production. Training them reminded me why I loved this work in the first place, teaching someone the precise temperature for tempering chocolate or how to achieve the perfect lamination in croissant dough. Watching them create beautiful pastries under my guidance gave me the same satisfaction I felt when I first learned these techniques myself. The precision required for pastry work, the way tiny adjustments in temperature or timing could make or break a recipe, the creativity involved in developing new flavors and presentations, all of it felt meaningful again without the shadow of Lisa's criticism. I spent hours in the kitchen with my new hires perfecting recipes and developing systems for consistency across locations. Their enthusiasm and respect for the craft validated everything I'd fought to protect, proving that serious professionals took this work as seriously as any other career. A culinary magazine reached out asking to interview me about being a male pastry chef in a field often seen as feminine, and I agreed despite feeling nervous about discussing personal topics publicly. The interviewer asked thoughtful questions about gender stereotypes in culinary arts and pressure to pursue traditionally masculine careers. I talked honestly about Lisa's campaign against my work and how she called it embarrassing and feminine, like those were bad things. I explained the 6-month ultimatum and my decision to open the bakery instead of changing careers to satisfy someone else's expectations. The interviewer asked what I'd say to other men facing similar pressure to abandon creative or nurturing professions. I said that following your passion matters more than following others' expectations, that there's nothing masculine or feminine about creating something beautiful that brings people joy. The work requires skill and dedication and artistic vision regardless of the chef's gender. The piece published 3 weeks later with photos of me working in the kitchen and samples of elaborate cakes I'd created. The response was overwhelming, with dozens of messages from men in similar situations thanking me for speaking up. Several said their partners or family members questioned their career choices in baking or pastry arts, and reading about my experience helped them feel less alone. One guy said his girlfriend gave him a similar ultimatum about his cake decorating business, and my story gave him courage to choose his passion over her approval. The bakery's 3-month anniversary arrived without fanfare, just another busy day of production and sales. But driving home that evening, I found myself reflecting on everything that changed in such a short time. Professionally, I was running a successful business with a second location opening soon and national media coverage of my work. The financial success exceeded my projections from when I first pitched investors, and the critical reception validated years of training and practice. Personally, I was single for the first time in years, living alone in my apartment without the constant tension of Lisa's disapproval. The emotional landscape felt complicated, a mix of triumph over professional success and loss over the relationship ending and excitement about future possibilities. I wasn't the same person who agreed to Lisa's 6-month ultimatum at our anniversary dinner. That version of me was defensive and hurt and determined to prove her wrong. This version felt more settled and confident, motivated by genuine love for the work rather than spite towards someone who didn't appreciate it. I started dating casually after a friend convinced me to try one of those apps. Nothing serious, but just meeting new people without expectations. The first few dates felt awkward after 3 years with Lisa, like I'd forgotten how to talk to someone new. But it got easier, and I found myself enjoying the process of getting to know different people without the weight of a failing relationship hanging over everything. One woman I met for coffee was a graphic designer who asked detailed questions about my work and seemed genuinely interested in the creative process. Another worked in finance but didn't make weird comments about my career being feminine or inappropriate for men. It felt good to be appreciated for who I actually was, rather than constantly defending my choices or justifying my profession. I learned what I actually wanted in a partner, now that I wasn't fighting to maintain my identity against someone trying to change it. I wanted someone who celebrated my success rather than feeling threatened by it, who understood that passion for your work was attractive, not embarrassing, who measured relationship value by mutual support rather than social perception. Natalie came into work one Monday morning with her left hand extended, showing off an engagement ring, and the whole kitchen staff gathered around congratulating her. Her boyfriend proposed over the weekend during a hiking trip they'd planned for months. I hugged her and felt genuinely happy watching her excitement, and she showed me photos from the proposal that her boyfriend had arranged for a friend to capture. Later that week, I met her fiancé when he came by to pick her up after her shift, and I watched how he talked about her culinary skills to other staff members. He was clearly proud of her talent and career, bragging about dishes she'd created and asking her opinion on restaurants they should try. He mentioned that his coworkers were jealous he got to eat her cooking all the time, and Natalie smiled at him with obvious affection. Watching their genuine support for each other's dreams highlighted what was missing with Lisa, the fundamental respect and pride in your partner's accomplishments. Her fiancé didn't feel emasculated by her success or embarrassed by her profession. He celebrated it and encouraged it, and wanted other people to know how talented she was. That's what partnership should look like. Two people building each other up, rather than one person demanding the other become someone different to satisfy external expectations. I spent the next few months getting ready for the second bakery location, and this time everything felt different. The first opening was about proving Lisa wrong, showing her what she'd thrown away. This one was just about building something good. I signed the lease on a smaller space in a neighborhood with lots of families and young professionals. The rent was cheaper than downtown, and I could focus on everyday pastries instead of fancy showpieces. Croissants and coffee for morning commuters, birthday cakes for kids' parties, cookies for after-school snacks. I hired 3 new staff members and trained them alongside my team from the original location. Everyone got cross-trained so they could work at either bakery if needed. We developed systems for splitting inventory and coordinating special orders between both places. My head pastry chef took charge of the new location's kitchen, and I finally learned to step back and trust other people with the recipes I'd spent years perfecting. The second grand opening happened on a Tuesday morning with no news cameras or celebrity guests. Just neighbors coming in for coffee and pastries, families checking out the new spot in their area. I stood behind the counter helping customers and felt more satisfied than I did at the fancy downtown opening. This was about serving the community, not making a statement. Both locations settled into a rhythm over the following weeks. The original bakery still handled wedding cakes and high-end orders, while the new spot focused on daily staples and custom birthday cakes. Revenue from both places exceeded my projections, and I started thinking about maybe opening a third location in a year or two. 6 months after the breakup, I got invited to a mutual friend's wedding. I almost didn't go because I knew Lisa would be there, but our friend had been supportive through everything, and I wanted to celebrate with her. I showed up to the ceremony and took a seat near the back. Lisa arrived 10 minutes later with a guy I didn't recognize. He had teacher written all over him, sensible haircut and a kind face, wearing a suit that looked like he didn't wear suits often. They sat 3 rows ahead of me, and I watched Lisa lean into him during the vows in a way that looked comfortable and natural. After the ceremony, everyone headed to the reception at a hotel ballroom. I grabbed a drink and talked to some old friends, catching up on their lives and answering questions about the bakeries. Lisa found me by the bar about an hour into the reception. She looked good, less stressed than I remembered. She smiled and said hi, and I said hi back. We stood there for a second, both of us probably wondering how this conversation would go. She asked how I was doing, and I said good, busy with 2 locations now. She said she'd heard about the second bakery from friends, and that it looked great based on Instagram posts. I could tell she meant it without any of the old resentment or embarrassment about my career. She introduced me to her boyfriend, whose name was David and who taught 7th grade English. He shook my hand and said he'd heard a lot about me. Lisa blushed a little at that, but didn't look uncomfortable. We chatted for a few minutes about teaching and baking and how the wedding ceremony was beautiful. Lisa mentioned that the bakery had gotten amazing reviews and that she was glad things worked out for me. I told her she looked happy, and she said she was, that therapy had helped her work through a lot of stuff about self-worth and comparison. David excused himself to get them drinks, and Lisa and I stood together watching the dance floor. She said she was sorry for how everything went down, that she'd been in a bad place mentally and took it out on me instead of dealing with her own issues. I told her I appreciated the apology and that I was sorry too for the way I handled the grand opening, that it was cruel even if I felt justified at the time. She said she understood why I did it, that she'd backed me into a corner and I came out swinging. We both agreed that we'd hurt each other, but also learned important things about ourselves in the process. The anger and pain from our breakup had faded into something quieter, just acceptance of what happened and appreciation for the lessons we both needed to learn. She asked about my dating life, and I said I'd been seeing people casually but nothing serious yet. She nodded and said she hoped I found someone who appreciated my work the way I deserved. The DJ announced that dinner was served and everyone moved toward their assigned tables. Lisa and I ended up at different tables on opposite sides of the room. During dinner, the wedding cake got wheeled out for display before dessert service. It was from a competitor bakery in town, a decent 3-tier design with buttercream flowers. Lisa caught my eye from across the room and mouthed that mine would have been better. I laughed and shrugged like, what can you do? After dinner, Lisa stopped by my table on her way to the bathroom. She joked that the cake was fine but not up to my standards, and I said every bakery had their own style. We both laughed, and it felt good to share a light moment about something that used to cause so much pain between us. The fact that we could joke about wedding cakes and pastry work proved we'd both healed enough to find humor in the past instead of just hurt. David came over and put his arm around Lisa's waist, and they headed back to their table together. I watched them go and felt genuinely glad that she'd found someone who seemed to support her without judgment. 3 weeks later, I attended a food industry networking event downtown. These things were usually boring, just a bunch of restaurant owners and suppliers making small talk over cheap wine. But my accountant said networking was important for business growth, so I showed up and worked the room. I was talking to a produce supplier about seasonal fruit options when someone tapped my shoulder. I turned around to find a woman about my age with flowers still visible on her shirt collar. She apologized for interrupting and said she'd wanted to meet me since reading about my bakeries in the local food magazine. Her name was Jordan, and she ran the kitchen at an upscale restaurant across town. We started talking about the challenges of pastry work and the demands of running a kitchen. She understood the long hours and the obsession with getting techniques exactly right. We talked for almost an hour about different approaches to laminating dough and the best chocolate suppliers and whether European butter was worth the extra cost. It felt easy and natural, sharing professional excitement with someone who got it without needing convincing. Before the event ended, Jordan asked if I wanted to grab coffee sometime and talk more about the industry. I said yes, and we exchanged numbers. Our coffee date turned into dinner, which turned into regular weekend plans. Jordan would come by the bakery after her restaurant shifts ended, and we'd test new flavor combinations in my kitchen. She offered thoughtful feedback on my pastries, suggesting a little less sugar here or a different spice blend there. I visited her restaurant and watched her run her kitchen with the same intensity I brought to baking. We'd compare notes about difficult customers and unreliable suppliers and the satisfaction of creating something people genuinely loved. Dating someone who understood the culinary world felt completely different from my relationship with Lisa. Jordan never questioned whether my career was masculine enough or worried about what her friends thought. She bragged about my work to her colleagues and brought their restaurant staff to my bakery for team outings. When I talked about new menu ideas or expansion plans, she engaged with genuine interest instead of barely hidden embarrassment. The ease of being with someone who celebrated my success, rather than feeling threatened by it, felt almost strange after years of defending my choices. 4 months into dating Jordan, the local Chamber of Commerce announced their annual business awards. The bakery got nominated for Best New Establishment, competing against a craft brewery and a boutique fitness studio. I didn't think much about it until they called to say we'd won. The awards ceremony was scheduled for a Friday night at the convention center. I invited my whole team from both locations, and Jordan took the night off from her restaurant to come with me. We all got dressed up and carpooled to the event together. The ceremony included dinner and speeches from various business leaders. When they announced the Best New Establishment category, I walked up on stage to accept a glass plaque and pose for photos. Standing there looking out at my staff and Jordan and all the local business owners who'd supported me, I felt genuinely grateful for how everything had unfolded. Even the painful parts with Lisa had led me to this moment, running successful bakeries and dating someone who truly understood me. The journey had been messy and complicated, but it brought me to exactly where I needed to be. 2 weeks after the awards ceremony, I got an email from a national culinary publication asking to feature me in their profile series on innovative pastry chefs. They wanted to interview me about my approach to baking and photograph both bakery locations. The writer came out the following week and spent a full day with me, watching me work and asking detailed questions about my career path. I told her about Lisa's ultimatum and my decision to choose passion over others' expectations. The writer seemed fascinated by that part of the story and asked if she could include it in the article. I agreed, figuring my experience might help other people dealing with similar pressure to abandon careers they loved. The article came out 6 weeks later with professional photos of my pastries in both bakery locations. The headline read something about following your passion despite stereotypes. They quoted me talking about the importance of doing work you love, regardless of what society says about gender and careers. The piece got shared widely on social media, and I started getting messages from other male pastry chefs thanking me for speaking up. Several culinary schools reached out about guest chef opportunities, and a few restaurants asked about consulting work to improve their dessert programs. The morning after the article published, my phone buzzed with a text from Lisa. She congratulated me on the national feature and said the article was really well done. We exchanged a few messages about how we were both doing. She said her therapy was going well and that she'd gotten a promotion at work. I told her about Jordan and the consulting opportunities coming from the article. Lisa said she was genuinely happy for me and glad we'd both found success and happiness in our separate lives. The conversation felt friendly and warm, completely different from the angry texts she'd sent right after the breakup. We'd both moved forward and healed enough to wish each other well without resentment. The bakery's first anniversary approached faster than I expected. I decided to host a celebration at the original location to thank everyone who'd supported the business. We planned an evening event with free samples of our best pastries and champagne for the adults. I invited regular customers, suppliers, investors, and staff from both locations. Jordan helped me coordinate the details and design a special anniversary cake. The night of the celebration, both bakery locations closed early so the whole team could attend. The original space filled with people eating pastries and sharing stories about their favorite items from our menu. I gave a short toast thanking everyone for making the bakery successful and for believing in what we were building together. The event felt joyful and uncomplicated, focused on gratitude rather than drama. Looking around at the crowd of supporters and the business I'd built, I felt genuinely content with how my life had turned out. The anniversary celebration wrapped up around midnight, and as the last guests filtered out, I stood at the center of my bakery surrounded by empty champagne bottles and half-eaten pastries. Jordan helped me stack chairs while Natalie wiped down tables, and I felt this overwhelming need to say something meaningful. I clinked a fork against a glass and waited for everyone still there to turn around. I talked about how a year ago I'd opened this place partly out of anger and partly out of desperation to prove someone wrong. But somewhere along the way, it became about something bigger. I said that following what you love isn't always easy, especially when people you care about tell you it's wrong or embarrassing or not good enough. I mentioned how important it is to surround yourself with people who celebrate your passions instead of trying to shrink them down to something more acceptable. The small group left in the bakery started clapping, and the sound felt different from the polite applause at fancy events or awards ceremonies. This felt real and earned, like these people actually understood what I was trying to say. Jordan caught my eye from across the room and smiled in this way that made my chest feel tight. And I realized how completely different this moment felt compared to the grand opening 12 months ago when everything was wrapped up in revenge and hurt feelings. Jordan and I walked back to my apartment that night, and somewhere between the bakery and my building, the conversation shifted to something I'd been thinking about for weeks. Jordan brought up the lease ending in 3 months and asked what my plans were, and I took a breath and said, maybe we should think about finding a place together. The words came out easier than I expected, and Jordan's whole face lit up in the glow of the streetlights. We spent the walk home talking about what we'd need in an apartment, how to split expenses fairly when we both had unpredictable income from the restaurant work, and what our schedules would look like living together. Jordan worried about us getting in each other's way since we both kept weird hours and needed kitchen space to experiment with recipes at home. I pointed out that we could set up separate workstations and maybe even use the creative overlap to push each other's cooking forward. The conversation felt exciting and practical at the same time, full of actual problem-solving instead of ultimatums or demands that one person changed to fit the other's vision. I thought about how different this was from planning a future with Lisa, where every discussion about our life together came with conditions and requirements about who I needed to become. With Jordan, the planning centered on how to support what we both already were. Mateo called me 2 days after the anniversary party and asked if I could meet him for lunch. We sat in a cafe near the second bakery location, and he pulled out a folder full of market research and financial projections. He said he'd been looking at a neighboring city about 40 minutes away, a place with a growing population and basically no high-end bakery options. The numbers looked solid, and he thought we could open a third location there within 6 months if I was interested in expanding that fast. I stared at the papers spread across our table and realized the business had grown way beyond what I'd originally planned. When I'd opened the first bakery, I was thinking about proving Lisa wrong and showing her what she'd lost by demanding I give up pastry work. But now I was looking at actual expansion plans, employee hiring strategies, and long-term growth projections. Mateo talked about building a regional brand, maybe eventually franchising the concept or opening locations in other states. I was creating something with real staying power, opportunities for other chefs to build careers, and bringing something valuable to thousands of customers who just wanted excellent pastries made with care and skill. The revenge motivation that had fueled everything a year ago felt distant now, replaced by genuine excitement about what we were building and where it could go. The culinary school reached out 3 weeks later, asking if I'd teach a masterclass on advanced pastry techniques. I spent a Saturday afternoon with 20 students showing them how to work with temperamental ingredients like chocolate and how to construct cakes that wouldn't collapse under their own weight. The students asked smart questions about ingredient ratios and baking temperatures, and I felt useful in a way that went beyond just making pretty desserts. After the class ended, 3 male students hung back and waited until everyone else had left. One of them thanked me for proving that men could succeed in pastry, despite all the stereotypes about it being feminine work. Another mentioned that his girlfriend had been questioning his career choice, suggesting he should do something more traditionally masculine instead of baking. The third student just nodded along, and I could see he was dealing with similar pressure, even if he didn't want to say it out loud. I told them about Lisa's ultimatum, and the 6 months I spent secretly building my business while she thought I was job hunting. I explained how painful it was to have someone I loved tell me my work was embarrassing, but also how that pressure forced me to figure out what I actually wanted badly enough to fight for it. I said they needed to decide if pastry work meant enough to them to handle the judgment and stereotypes, because those wouldn't go away just because they got successful. But I also told them that doing work you genuinely love beats doing work that other people respect, and that the right partner would celebrate their skills instead of trying to change them into something more socially acceptable. Walking back to my car after the masterclass, I kept thinking about what that student had said about his girlfriend questioning his choices. Lisa's pressure had been awful to live through, all those months of her calling my career embarrassing and insisting I needed to find more masculine work. But if she'd been supportive, would I have stayed comfortable in my restaurant job instead of taking the huge risk of opening my own business? I probably would have kept working for someone else, making good money and winning occasional competitions, but never pushing myself to build something bigger. The ultimatum she'd given me at our anniversary dinner had forced me to choose between the life she wanted and the life I needed, and making that choice had led to everything good that came after. I'd built 3 bakery locations, created jobs for dozens of employees, and proven that pastry work could be both artistically fulfilling and financially successful. Without Lisa's pressure, I might never have taken that leap. I didn't regret how things ended with Lisa, not anymore. The breakup had been messy and public and painful for both of us, but it taught me something crucial about standing firm in who I actually was. For months during our relationship, I'd tried to defend my career choice and justify why making pastries mattered, like I needed her permission to keep doing the work I loved. The ultimatum had clarified everything by forcing me to choose, and choosing myself over her approval had been the right call even when it hurt. I'd learned that compromising core parts of your identity to keep someone comfortable never works long-term, because you end up resenting them for asking and resenting yourself for agreeing. The lessons had been expensive in terms of emotional cost and a failed 3-year relationship, but they'd shaped who I'd become in ways I wouldn't trade away. I knew now what I needed in a partner and what I absolutely wouldn't accept, and that knowledge had led me to Jordan and a relationship that actually worked. Jordan and I spent a month looking at apartments before we found one that fit our needs. The place had a huge kitchen with enough counter space for both of us to work, 2 bathrooms so we wouldn't fight over morning schedules, and big windows that let in natural light. Moving day felt significant in a way I hadn't expected, like we were actively building something new instead of just combining our existing lives. We unpacked boxes together and argued good-naturedly about where things should go, and the whole process felt easy and fun rather than stressful. That first night in our shared apartment, we cooked dinner together in our new kitchen, experimenting with a recipe Jordan had been developing for the restaurant. I worked on a dessert component while Jordan handled the main course, and we kept stealing bites from each other's stations and offering suggestions. The apartment started feeling like a creative laboratory, where we could test ideas and push each other's techniques forward, and I realized this was what partnership was supposed to look like. The 3rd bakery location opened 6 months later in the neighboring city Mateo had researched. Jordan took the day off from the restaurant to be there with me, and the whole event felt purely celebratory without any personal drama lurking underneath. I'd invited staff from all 3 locations, investors, regular customers who'd driven 40 minutes to support the expansion, and local press covering the opening. The mayor of this new city cut the ribbon, and I gave a short speech about bringing quality pastries to communities that deserved them. Jordan stood next to me during the photos, and having a partner there who was genuinely proud of what I'd built made the success feel complete in a way the first opening never had. No ex-girlfriend showing up expecting something different, no public confrontations about career choices, just straightforward celebration of a business milestone with people who actually supported what I was doing. 2 years had passed since the grand opening confrontation with Lisa at the first bakery location. I was running 3 successful businesses now, managing a staff of 40 employees across all locations, and planning potential 4th and 5th expansions with Mateo. My relationship with Jordan was solid and supportive, built on mutual respect for each other's careers and actual partnership rather than one person trying to reshape the other. I was genuinely happy with the life I'd created, and the revenge element that had started everything felt completely gone now. I didn't think about Lisa much anymore, except when something reminded me of that period, and when I did think about her, it was without anger or bitterness. She'd been wrong about my career, but her wrongness had pushed me towards something better than I'd originally planned, and I could be grateful for that while still being glad we'd gone our separate ways. I designed a new signature cake for the 3rd location's opening, a 5-tier creation even more elaborate than the proposal cake I'd made for Lisa 2 years earlier. This one featured sugar flowers in 6 different varieties, hand-painted details on every tier, and a chocolate structure that had taken me 3 weeks to perfect. But unlike that first cake that sat in the window with a sign saying it was reserved for someone who deserved it, this one wasn't attached to any person or relationship. It was pure celebration of what could be created with skill and patience and genuine love for the craft. The cake represented everything I'd built over 2 years, every early morning and late night in the kitchen, every risk taken and lesson learned, and everyone who'd helped me get here. Standing back and looking at it in the display case, I felt proud of what I'd accomplished and excited about what came next. Jordan and I stood together at the third location's ribbon-cutting ceremony 6 months after opening, and the mayor handed me the oversized scissors while cameras flashed from every direction. I cut through the red ribbon and the crowd applauded, but the real moment came when I looked at Jordan standing beside me with genuine pride on their face, not embarrassment or shame about what I did for a living. No. We walked through the new space together after the ceremony ended, pointing out design choices and kitchen equipment to investors and food critics who'd made the trip. Mateo pulled me aside during a quiet moment and mentioned he'd already received interest from 2 more cities wanting locations, and I realized the business had grown beyond anything I'd imagined when I was secretly planning that first bakery 2 years ago. The revenge element that had fueled everything felt completely gone now, replaced by pure excitement about building something meaningful and lasting. I designed special pastries for each location that reflected the neighborhood's character, and watching customers discover flavors they'd never tried before brought satisfaction that had nothing to do with proving anyone wrong. Jordan and I announced our engagement at the third location's 1-month celebration party, and my staff cheered while Natalie immediately started asking about wedding cake plans. I told everyone I'd be designing it myself, a 7-tier creation that would represent our partnership and shared love for culinary arts. Planning a wedding with someone who celebrated my career instead of criticizing it felt like final proof that leaving Lisa had been the right choice, even when it hurt. We tasted cake flavors together in my home kitchen, debating vanilla bean versus almond, and Jordan's genuine interest in every detail made me realize how much energy I'd wasted defending myself in my previous relationship. The wedding planning process became another creative project we could share, and I sketched cake designs while Jordan planned the menu for our reception dinner. Our wedding day arrived on a perfect spring afternoon with clear skies and warm sun. I stood in the bakery's kitchen that morning putting final touches on our 7-tier cake, each layer representing something important about our relationship and journey together. The bottom tier featured sugar flowers I'd spent weeks perfecting, and the top tier had delicate chocolate work that showed how far my skills had grown since that proposal cake I'd made for Lisa. I transported the cake to the venue myself, refusing to trust anyone else with something so personal and important. The ceremony took place in a garden with our closest friends and family watching, plus staff from all 3 bakery locations and colleagues from across the culinary industry. When we cut into the cake during the reception, I felt overwhelming gratitude for the painful journey that had brought me here. Lisa's ultimatum had been meant to diminish me and force me into a life that wasn't mine, but instead, it had freed me to become fully myself and build something extraordinary. I looked around at the people celebrating with us, all of them genuinely happy about my success and supportive of my choices, and realized the best revenge hadn't been the dramatic confrontation at the grand opening. The best revenge was simply building an authentic life, doing exactly what I loved with someone who loved me for it, surrounded by people who appreciated the work and passion that went into every creation I made.